Hello. So today we're talking about AI in the workplace. And what does that mean? The implications for leaders looking to incorporate that well for their teams and how to look out for their people in 2025. This is not the robots taking our jobs debate. This is how to make and leverage the best of AI so that you are a more productive workplace. Joining me is Jamil. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell our audience a bit more about your background and why it matters so much to you?
Hi, Rich. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm a career CTO. I've been working in senior leadership in technology, driving development, as well as transformation within banking and financial services, as well as the government entities. This topic is really on point at the moment, and people are thinking about it, but not necessarily going into the kind of detail that it really deserves, I think. So it's a great start and a great thought from you, Rich. It starts with value, right? What value does it bring? And what does value mean to me? Obviously, value is time. Does it save me time? It's actually money. Does it save me money, increase my revenue for the company, the organization I'm in? And it's about risk. Does it reduce, mitigate, and control risk, or does it add more risk to the situation? And status, at the end of the day, does it impact the overall effectiveness of the organization as well as how it's perceived to the outside world? Sometimes people say we're AI enabled, so everyone goes, wow, fantastic. So that's a status bit, right? But those are kind of things that I look at, irrespective of whether it's AI or not. But AI is the kind of the topic. So I look at these kind of things and how it brings it into the kind of business as usual space. And then I add a little extra to it by saying, well, how does our business strategy or tech strategy fit with, or how does AI fit into that? So you kind of going to get it working in both kind of aspects and dimensions of the organization. But trust is a big deal thing, and I think we might touch on the topic of ethics, but at the end of the day, it's a black box, right? And we don't understand its motivations, but we like what it comes out with. But that's in the short term. What happens in the long term? Therefore, that kind of connection with a human being and trust and ethics umbrella is kind of key in terms of making that kind of decision. So
yeah, absolutely. And I guess to what extent, from what you see within the industry and the kind of clients that you speak to, are people looking at it as a tool to get an outcome only, and they're only thinking about like the output? Where are they potentially failing on trust?
Well, at the moment, I think trust is 50-50. Some people are actually putting trust as a key element, and other people just in the wayside, right? But I think can it do what I want it to do, and can I do it with less people? Is kind of the general thinking, which I think is a kind of necessarily wrong direction to go in. But does it save on repetitive tasks? But does it allow me to still have that human context in terms of the team dynamics? And if it removes a lot of things, you might actually end up with an organization with very few people communicating with each other and bouncing ideas and thought processes. So it does have, like everything, right? It's positives and negatives. You can't remove the human factor of it, but how can you use it to enhance the user, the human being, the input, the impact that they bring into your team, to your organization, and so forth. So it's work in progress. I think it's like you get a new shiny toy, and it's just like, exactly where does it fit? Do you put it in that corner, or do you put it in that corner, or in the middle of the room? Who gets to use it? How do they get to use it? Well, all those kind of things are the kind of aspects of a tech organization, for example, in my case, would be looking at how AI does stuff. I mean, there is obviously anecdotal stuff like, using Cursor or using whatever tool to write better and that kind of stuff, or create documentation. They're great. But that's just the beginning. That's just anecdotal experimentation, I call it, rather than real deep integration into an organizational fabric, really.
And that's very interesting. But I guess the other thing that I see is that more and more people are using AI, and not just those working within the tech space. And clearly, it's become omnipresent for many people because of the nature of removing those repetitive tasks, like you say. Do you worry that there is going to be more reliance on that side of AI? Are we becoming too overly dependent already? Will we look back at 2025 and go, hey, this was the point where we could have taken it a different direction?
Well, you're right. I mean, and there is definitely a risk of that happening, and we're seeing it already in many, many places. However, I mean, it's complacency, right? So if if we get a tool that does the job, right? And then we feel kind of become redundant, and therefore we just sit back and relax. That doesn't help us go forwards and progress and advance, right? So it's no different to the calculator. We use abacus, right, to do simple mathematics. Some did very complex mathematics using an abacus back in the day. But we've got a calculator, so we're a lot easier to do, x plus y, etc. But as it got complicated, we went back to writing the formula down and then using a calculator to do much more complex stuff. So not that I'm saying AI with this big, huge engine and the energy consumes and so on is going to be like a calculator in one sense, but it does a lot more. The idea is, how do we use it as effectively as possible? It's just like any tool, right? So even if it costs $20 a month or $200 a month, how can I get the maximum output from that tool? And if we're not, then that is a worry, right? But I see that a lot in tech and in business. We buy a lot of tools. And what I tend to see is like, whether it's Jira for managing our code development and so on, and then somebody else uses another tool, but actually Jira has tools for project management. So, are we using the full extent of that application?
Yeah.
Probably not. Probably 20, 30%. And the same goes with AI, right? Maybe we're asking it simpler questions than what it's supposed to be able to handle. So the question of getting smarter about using it, understanding the real depth that it could actually help us with. And we might find we reach limitation of what it can do.
And I think you raised a really interesting point there, having that judgment. When I look at leaders, when I talk to people, what they're always keen for is that strategy comes off the page. And the way they want people to do that is by having a highly engaged workforce who are thinking. And frankly, they are, let's face it, putting in discretionary effort everywhere so that there is something that's happening that is the thing that you can't touch, the X factor maybe, but it's that thing that we know must be there. With AI, I think we're seeing that people are able to use it now, but if you were coming up through the ranks and it's potentially you're a person in the earlier stages of your career, how will you develop that eye? How will you develop that judgment?
Well, I mean, everything we've learned, or at least in my case, and I'm sure that's no different than everyone else, is by trial and error, right? So if you're coming up, let's just say you're a junior developer or a junior program manager and so on, at the end of the day, look at it as a tool, as your buddy, right? So any gaps that you don't know, which you shouldn't actually fear by putting your hand up and asking your other team members. So that should never stop, right? You should be able to still be able to comfortably ask the silly questions, because I think there's never a silly question. So there's that. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with you asking AI that question that you're having a gap with, and sort of understand what it is, and then be better at asking the question in context of what you're doing. So at least you appear that you've done a little bit more homework and you frame the question in the right place. So that would make you smarter and better at asking questions, perhaps, right? Rather than just coming empty-handed with just an open-ended question. So I think it has a role.
There's a really interesting point you raised there, which is around maybe the bit that we're not talking about, which is, yes, use AI, find a way to give it, let it take your task, let it automate, let it return those results. But then actually there's the critical thinking step. And I think maybe that's something that we're going to see leaders doing more of, is saying, great, it gave you the result. I think about this as the early days of using a sat nav. People would drive because it said go left here, but it couldn't account for certain things. It didn't account for height limitations or weight limitations, and people would follow it slavishly. The same with using a GPS. If you're map reading, you have to look at those results and then think, but based on what I know, what do I feel about that, and where do I think that fits within my wider learning model? And I think there's a point here for leaders across many industries, but helping their people distinguish between the tool where it's let it do its thing, but the tool also, and then you now need to exercise human judgment at the end, and then your creativity can go, based on what I know, is that the right kind of information that I'm seeing?
Absolutely. And your example of a GPS is a perfect example, right? So as an individual in a company, let's just put yourself in the car. You want to go from A to B. not everyone has a sense of direction, right? So we
Sure.
know it's kind of, ask people where is north and they may not get it right, right? Or south and so forth. So they use GPS to get you to the outcome, the result that you want a lot
Yeah.
quicker than, say, reading a map, right? But if you were to do that trip the first 3 times using GPS, sooner rather than later, it becomes automatic because you've got some sort of intuition, autopilot in your head that you've already worked out. Okay, those are the things that I see on my way there, and so on. So that's no different to having to do our job in software development, for example.
Sure.
You would use it to help you on that ladder, keep on going up and down, up and down. After that, you can do it yourself. But at the same time, this machine can do the boilerplate code that I want quite quickly, but it
Yeah.
might not be exactly how I want it first time. Do it second time or third time, it could get, refined to how you'd like things done. And then the fourth time, it will give you the boilerplate exactly how you want it. So it's a learning journey for the human. There's a learning journey for the machine, and I just see it as a buddy. So that machine is learning my style of doing things and my company's style of doing things, and it should be a supporting factor in your career journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you say, it's a tool. Thinking though about someone's career, I guess, when does career development and growth become so related and so entwined with AI? I'm sure professional services firms are. I know my old one is placing a KPI there for professional sort of, or rather for the appraisal cycle around how much you're using AI and to what extent are you incorporating it into your daily work. So does career development look like you become the best at asking AI really, really good questions, or do you become the best at doing your job?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult, right? We learn by example, right? And
Mm.
this is where leadership fits in, right? So this is, a good leader should be leading by example, demonstrating by example, seeing the weak points in his team, focusing on those individuals, say, okay, these areas that need to be strengthened,
Yeah.
and this is how you go about doing it. And there's no harm to use AI to expand on that. Now, your leader may not have sufficient time for you all the time, right? So if they're given the guidance, there's no harm in using the tool to expand on that and elaborate on that. So it's like a book on demand. So if you want to learn about leadership, you can can buy 5 or 6 books and read them. Fantastic. And what AI will do is help you read or access, answer a lot quicker. But that doesn't replace the context of the real world, or which you doing that in the real world
Yeah.
has a very different volatile response. Meaning volatile, I don't mean in a physical sense, but in terms of that's what you read, that's not necessarily what you got when you actually did it in practice.
Yeah.
So it helps you, it's part of the journey, but at the end of the day, you must practice because the other side, whoever you're speaking to, may be of a different mindset today as they are tomorrow, right? So
Yeah.
you can't, you're not going to get necessarily the same answer or behavior from that individual. So yeah, use the tool for all intent and purposes to actually learn, and ask it also how could you improve this certain weakness and so forth. So again, I just see it as a tool, like having different buddies, right? So people are using agentic AI for marketing, right? So this one will write something, this one will do SEO, this one will do something else, this one will schedule it, this one will post on different stuff, right? So those are the kind of things in that context of that role. But from your context as an individual, and if let's just say you're in tech, you would use it to write stuff that you can quickly review, it's going to do it, right? And the other part is, how do I effectively do something better in a project management scenario, or how, plot me a course of how I can improve my skills in communication or being more visible. So you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily just a tech tool. You would have different buddies for the different problems that you have, and
Yeah.
it's just there. And assuming it continues learning about you, as well as it being taught more information from the stuff that's available on the ether, it could be a very useful resource tool. But the onus is
Yeah.
on you at the end to pick the golden nuggets from the output
Yeah.
and make something out of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But for me, there's a very interesting point, really, which is because we are using AI more, and everyone, I think, ought to be. If you aren't, and your peers are within a company, then why not? But and you should be looking to that. But there's so much more than sort of just ChatGPT, which other people, which, let's face it, most people have heard of. I mean, you see what tools people are putting together, they're stitching together different AIs to take things out of out of a traditional way of thinking. I think it's very impressive. I think there's a real requirement, though, within this to maintain the human connection whilst using more and more, or whilst more and more of BAU relies now on AI, relying heavily. Now, I see consulting firms who are advertising that they have AI and, nothing's out of scope. And that's fantastic. And you go, great, but if nothing's out of scope, then you've got a very wide remit. That means nothing's in focus for me. And you still maintain that need for humans to be involved to see that and do it. So the power of human connection, to have a great team who appreciate what AI can do, but also know where its shortcomings are, can understand when the GPS is going to send you down a dead end, I think becomes ever more important. So what tools might you expect leaders to be doing? And let's cast our minds forward, thinking about maybe the next 12 months. What might leaders be doing to maintain a human connection? Well, let's face it, the pace of AI is only going to continue. It's going to keep gathering speed. How might you bring that in? Or what have you seen others doing that you thought was a great idea that worked really nicely?
Sure. It's an interesting point in that human connection is key in any organization, in any family situation, in any context, really. If you take that out, what do you have? You don't have much, right? So I think we've had the first taste of it with COVID, the fact that push for remote, right? Work from home has its advantages, but I think the biggest disadvantage is that human connection. You can do it on Zoom or sessions like this, but it's not the same. Right.
Well, no, because we all craved connection and we craved structure, and we got online at all those calls and we did our daily stand-ups. And then what did we do with them? Right? We did a pub quiz. We brought in our pets, we brought in our children, and that's what we did when we actually found our structure.
So we kind of replaced the work team people with the dog and the family sort of thing, right? But it's not the same thing. So the human connection is essential, and I think as a leader, whether you're in tech or otherwise, and certainly in any business that's very tactile, human, relationship related, you need to have that in. You need to find a balance, right? So working from home remotely, 100%, for me is a bit of a concern for an organizational, cultural, people, connectivity, and so on. However, somewhere in the middle does make sense, so that way you can focus on your task and not consume time wasted in traveling and what have you. So you can spend days programming in your world of tech, for example, but then you need to have that human interaction, whether it's peer review of your content, what you've written, you got to have that review. And at the end of the day, people need to understand your thinking as to how you did it. How am I going to judge you for, I don't know, promotion or whatever it may be, if I have no contextual elements of your work because it's written by AI, or your contextual sort of existence in a team if you haven't had the interaction with them on a constant scenario. So you can't completely eradicate that. That's a critical one. And therefore, when you get together, it becomes so important that human connection is amplified. It's finding that balance.
I think that you raised the point that some people are very happy to use it. What might other leaders do if there are, those who are less convinced? There are always some people who have jumped straight into AI and using it for everything, and they're automating their personal life, and they're doing it all, they're running their calendar and everything like that. For those people who are, let's maybe call them more AI anxious, what might be the approach for leaders to manage a team that, let's say, half the people are jumping in and half the people are like, I'm not sure, it's a bit creepy, AI knows a bit too much about me and things like that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you are putting content which is not in the public domain, but is in the domain of the companies providing you that environment, right? So therefore, they know about you, just like Facebook knows about you and so forth. I think the key here is to understand what is the fear, to understand, and that would be a great learning for me as a leader, because at the moment, I haven't seen specific fear, more trust in terms of quality from a tech perspective. But if there is fear, well, like anything, what is the root cause behind that fear? Is it that you don't believe the quality is good? Are you worried about surveillance? Are you worried about making a mistake? For example, putting private information of your organization on there and you don't know the scope. Just to understand that. And from that, things pop out, like policies, procedures, what to do, what not to do, and so on. You can't just say to people, here's a tool, like for me saying, here's a car, go drive. yeah, you've driven a car, but this one happens to be a V8 5.7 liter engine, right? So as soon as you press the pedal, it could go and hit a wall, right? So the same with AI as a tech, as a tool. If you have that apprehension that you think that you're scared it takes you somewhere else that's going to create more work, that could be one of those fears. So it's understanding where and how, and then how you tackle that by putting a structure, or maybe it's training, how you go about prompting without going into sort of a black hole or a rabbit hole for that matter.
Yeah.
So it's just a tool, help people with it. First of all, recognize there are people who have fears with it. Nobody's going to necessarily admit to that because they're embarrassed or whatever it may
That's
be.
a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, ask the question. Also, monitor by being present and seeing what they're doing, and you can easily see two people standing next to each other and they keep on swapping between, like, say, Cursor, the software engineering kind of tool that we use, and the other person who's not, right? So you can easily see that by being in the room, seeing the team, getting feedback, team meetings, etc., etc. And the idea is that how can you do cross-pollination? So if this guy has succeeded in a particular way, well, okay, John, help Matthew see that example, and maybe you can help him use his particular task to help him expedite a certain output. So at the end of the day, it's part of the team dynamics and so on. And if you are that example I gave you in terms of you're working from home all the time, you may not have that whole human connection and that context to even help in that space. So you've got to find that balance so that people don't end up hidden or too obvious as well.
Yeah, and I think to that extent, it makes me think a lot of, you can do that and pair people up who maybe someone who's not so happy with it, but someone who is, and that's fantastic. But that requires you to be in a psychologically safe environment. Now, we can't just say, hey, you should feel psychologically safe and that's it. So we've said it and it's done, that is an absolute output of empathetic leadership, of high emotional intelligence leadership, and people being treated well. And, you said before, there's no silly question. There isn't. But in some environments, some people don't feel comfortable to put their hand up. So they're not going to say, you know what, I'm not okay with AI and I don't quite know how to use it and I'm not quite sure where to take it.
Yeah, but you've got to do that, right? You've got to sense the room, right? So you've got 5-6 people in a room, and you know who's doing a lot of talking, you know who's not doing a lot of talking, and then maybe you need to spend some time with the ones who are not saying so much because it might be an issue of comfort, or it might be, I completely know I don't need any help, but it's just, academic for me. So you just need to read the room, work out who needs that assistance without having to say, do you need assistance, right? So you kind of ask the question, how's it going with this thing? And you get kind of feedback and so on. You also see it in terms of performance. So whether they're consistently behind in terms of delivery and so on. So you can kind of question as to why. I mean, there might be other factors in there, but let's assume that we ignore them for the moment. But, those are kind of things. It's like, okay, well, let's dig deeper. But that's what management is. It's not about me marching on in a particular direction and I'm hoping everyone's going to be behind me. I have to constantly look behind and see who needs help, find the strongest person to help them, and if not the third strongest person, because we need the strongest person to keep on pushing in the front. So AI is just a tool. Some people are going to be good at using it. Some people are not going to be good at using it. Cross-pollinate, help people in the team to help each other. It helps in the human context of it as well, and the connection as well. So it shouldn't eradicate that. It should be actually helping that as well at the same time. But it's a question of how you put it in.
Jamil, this has been fantastic. I'm sure there's actually some very good lessons there. Just to play it back for our audience, I think you're talking about being empathetic with your leadership, understanding team strengths, understanding how to get the best out of something, which is a tool. Let's face it, none of that is new. None of that is something that's come about because of AI. That's something that people have been doing for years. But we've just got to change our thinking, I think, and just bring that forward into a different way and make sure that it's relevant and keep questioning and testing maybe with our teams. That is the right way to lead right now. And I think also leaders can be open and honest. We don't have all the answers. The technology is moving so fast that actually, before we know it, I see firms struggling to make their own AIs internally, so they're not sharing data externally with LLMs. as soon as you've made one of those, how are you updating it? How are you making it as good as the GPT and the Perplexities and the Claudes of this world to make it worthwhile and actually be able to leverage that and make the most of the tool? But again, none of that is new. And hopefully that's all leadership stuff, which is already in people's brains. Jamil, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking again soon about more aspects of leadership with AI.
Thank you very much, Rich. Have a good day.